This is a Socialist News and Views special interview.
I'm Nick Schillingford, coming to you from the Urban Cabin Studios in South Minneapolis with this special interview. So on Socialist News and Views, we always have folks introduce themselves. Do you want to just tell our audience who you are?
Yeah, hi. My name is Sophie Scholl. I am an activist out of Milwaukee right now. I've lived all over Wisconsin. I've been an activist for 17 years now. I got into it through fighting for trans rights and queer rights, but I would say I pretty quickly realized that like all these different issues are connected and that you can't fight for any of them in a vacuum. And then, eventually I kind of drew, what people talk about like revolutionary conclusions or whatever, became a socialist. And I've been actively organizing in and around the labor movement for the last almost 7-ish years. That's my deal.
Yeah, and then you write the Substack international organizer, and
Yes.
that was
Sorry,
no, that was how we came to be connected. And I just read an article, an item that you had written, Trump takes aim at Cuba, perspectives and analysis. That was on International Organizer. Obviously, you paint that Cuba is in a dire situation, and since since I wrote these questions, even you've written another article too on Cuba called "Trump Prepares the Way for Counterrevolution in Cuba," and of course, I mean, there's so many things. This all comes on the heels of the U.S. abduction of Maduro in Venezuela, which we'll talk about a little bit. Of course, we're recording this. It's February 28th. Last night, the U.S. And Israel launched their attacks on Iran. So we aren't going to get into that today. But I mean, that's just to put the context of where we're sitting right now at this moment while we record this. First, what's the current situation in Cuba right now, from what you can understand, and what's the U.S. role at this moment?
Yeah, totally. I mean, for one, just before we, really hit it off, I guess just for my own kind of sake, I want to clarify. I don't really consider myself, like a proper expert on
Sure.
Cuba. I mean, for one, I've never been.
Right.
But as as an American socialist, I do feel a certain responsibility. I think to oppose the garbage that our government is doing, and I think that especially as a revolutionary socialist, we have a responsibility to defend what remains of the Cuban Revolution. Leon Trotsky, one of the leaders of the Russian Revolution, famously said that, those who can't defend old ground will never conquer new ground. And so I think that, there's a lot of confusion out there about Cuba. And there are some people, I think, that, kind of champion, in a very uncritical way, anything and everything that has ever had to do with it. And then I think there's also some people that, look at, the crimes of the Stalinist bureaucracy and want to write it off. And I think that neither of those are correct. And I think that the American left needs to grapple with that, because I don't think we're actually helping the people of Cuba in any way by uncritically championing a repressive bureaucracy. But on the other hand, we're certainly not helping them by not opposing Trump's imperial overreach and what is laying the basis for a counter revolution in Cuba. So what we're seeing right now in Cuba is really dire situations. UN officials who are not they're not the end all be all by any
Right.
means, but even they were forced to admit and describe it that as war waged by other means. And they said that Trump had created a humanitarian crisis in a country that never had one. It's their words, and so basically what we're seeing right now is things were already pretty dire for a long time, especially because of the U.S. embargo and sanctions and all of this stuff, which prevented trade with Cuba, all of these things. And there had been longstanding shortages of lots of basic things, including spare parts for electrical systems and water purification and all of these things. And it had led to various, or I should say, helped contribute to various economic crises and a crisis of immigration where people were trying to leave the island. And we can get into the whole economic aspect of it, which especially I think is important to talk about, the kind of I say post-COVID, not in the sense that, COVID ever really ended. It's still out there making people sick, but post-COVID in the sense of like, since COVID started, right? The economic collapse, all of these things, very important when we're talking about Cuba. But basically, now everything has been ratcheted up by Trump, and specifically because of the blockade, where nothing is being allowed into Cuba. One of the biggest and most important things that's not being allowed in is oil. So historically, Cuba relies on imports for a huge percentage of their oil. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I feel like I actually cited it in the article, so you can check it out there.
Yep.
But they rely on imports for their oil, and historically they got most of it from Venezuela. They got a good chunk of it from Mexico, and they also occasionally got help from Russia and China, although that help was sporadic and hasn't been consistent. So when Maduro was deposed in Venezuela, the situation you had was that Trump, kind of gave the game away and dropped the pretext immediately that this was, about like a drug bust or anything like that. And said, Venezuelan oil now belongs to the United States, and basically has set up a situation where the U.S., kind of like an abusive spouse, has like receivership almost of Venezuelan oil. They're controlling the sale of it, and some of the money is still going to Venezuela. I don't know if it's all of it or not. I don't have those numbers, but at the very least, what the Trump administration claims is that the money is going into a series of accounts that are controlled by the U.S. government, including Trump having direct oversight, and that Trump, as like a singular kind of entity, controls the flow of that money, and basically that it is apparently going to be spent, on behalf of the Venezuelan people, but in a way that Trump approves of, right? So it's like an abusive spouse controlling the checkbook. And you get this situation where now the Venezuelan oil that Cuba was relying on for a long time has basically been cut off. And that was the situation basically since January. And then Trump also unilaterally announced to the world that anyone who sent oil to, or most other things, but especially oil to Cuba, would be subject to massive U.S. tariffs. And this was a threat against everyone, but this was especially a threat against Mexico, which he had previously made kind of military posturing threats against, in relation to, ostensibly in relation to drug cartels, which he claims run the country. But this was something where basically the message that the Trump administration had was that no oil is going to go into Cuba. And this was ostensibly done on behalf of, the Cuban people, who they are trying to, quote unquote, free from, communism. And so, like the situation now, though, in the last week, actually just in the last few days, depending on when this goes up, has developed and changed. And we'll get into that. But basically, the oil shortage has created a massive energy crisis. For one, there's rolling blackouts. Some reports say they're as much as 20 hours a day or more, because they can't power the grid. Hospitals are down to emergency capacity. Schools and workplaces are being closed on an emergency basis. Trash is piling up in the streets
Yep.
because the garbage trucks can't run because
Mhm.
there's no gas, and basically everything is grinding to a halt. I think I said this, but hospitals are like on emergency only capacity, and so yeah, you end up with this situation where it's incredibly dire, and um, there have been discussions of some nations, whether it's Mexico or Canada or other places, sending humanitarian aid. Um, I don't necessarily think we can say for sure whether or not Trump will allow that in. He very well may, but he's kind of an unpredictable guy. But even if that humanitarian aid is allowed in, it won't power the generators, right?
Right.
So now what has happened? There are a couple developments. One was that Russia announced that it was sending an oil tanker. And full of 200,000 barrels of gas oil and I think other refined products or something
Mm.
to Cuba on the basis that of aid in breaking the I should say of on the basis of aid explicitly, not on the basis of breaking the blockade. They
Right.
haven't actually said that they're going to break the blockade. It's going to take weeks for the shipment to arrive, and we have kind of yet to see what's
Mhm.
going to happen there. I don't think it's likely, and I'm not the only one, it's worth saying, but I don't think it's likely that Russia actually will run the blockade and risk starting a war with Trump, especially while they're still embroiled in Ukraine, which has been very expensive and costly in other ways for Russia. And they haven't actually said anything to indicate that they are going to run the blockade. And so the question kind of is like, is this oil just going to be sitting there? And then there's an even more recent development that I found out about Wednesday. I think that was the day it was announced. If not, it was probably announced Tuesday. And towards the end of February here. And
Mhm.
basically, the situation is Trump has now announced that shipments of Venezuelan oil to Cuba are going to resume, but they're going to resume under U.S. control, and they're not probably going to resume in the amounts needed. It's going to be controlled like a spigot,
Sure.
but that specifically, the U.S. Treasury Department has announced that those sales of Venezuelan oil to Cuba are not going to be permitted to be sold. They're not going to do business with the Cuban government, with the Cuban military, with Cuban intelligence, with anyone affiliated with
Mm.
the Cuban state, and they're only going to do any sort of business with the Cuban private sector, which we can talk about.
Mm.
The Cuban private sector is like a thing that exists. It's actually quite sizable. It makes up about 55% of the retail economy, and it's been growing significantly since liberalization. Measures were introduced in 2021. So it's there is a Cuban capitalist class. They're not currently in state power, but they do exist. And Cuba was already kind of in a dangerous position in a state of transition. Um, and now, basically, what we're seeing is Trump seizing upon the situation and laying the basis for counter-revolution by basically strengthening the social base of the Cuban private sector and of the Cuban capitalist class, of strong arming and forcing out of the question of energy, um, you know, production, forcing out the Cuban state, and trying to basically create a situation where the Cuban state is cut out of the equation, and begins to not really be the real power. And so that is what the second kind of article, the update, the shorter one that we produced, was about. Yeah, it's very significant. I would say, I think the big question is that we don't know exactly how long this is going to take, because Trump has indicated that he's pursuing regime change in Cuba by the end of the year. And I think even he is aware that this might take a minute, because essentially what he wants to do is turn up the thumb screws, turn up the pain, that might take some time, and it's awful, it's manipulative, it's evil, but it's what he's doing.
Yeah, like I said, I mentioned in the beginning that this bombing of Iran by the U.S. and Israel is taking place currently as we speak, and it's really unfortunate, because it's going to pull news away from what's going on in Cuba that people were paying attention to. I'm sure that's partially probably on purpose. As you mentioned, they've been blocking oil ships. Like, neither of us have been to Cuba, but I have spoken to people on this program before that have visited Cuba, had good things to say about Cuba. Specifically, I was literally just talking to somebody before this podcast about how they had positive experiences with the police while they were in Cuba. And I was saying, obviously they're coming from outside, and so they're trying to give a good impression. But, I was just kind of thinking, I'd like to study like how the police that exist in Cuba right now came to be, compared to the U.S. police. But another thing is, like, this previous period, like during the height of COVID, Cuba seemed like they went through a positive democratic process. Specifically looking at like the 2022 family code. That was not only that not only went into effect, but was debated across Cuba by regular Cubans. Legalizing same-sex marriage, adoption, non-commercial surrogacy. Kind of changing the way they look at parental authority and stuff like that. From all that I had heard, that was a real positive step. And so obviously immediately, not immediately, but I mean in political time, I mean immediately the U.S. wants to like basically crush any positive example that Cuba is giving on anything to the U.S. You talked about the, putting Venezuela in receivership basically, and like essentially like taking control in a kind of a non-formal way, like they've kind of done, just like kind of de facto, by like, if you don't do what we want, we'll just like blow up your shit. But last night, I think it was last night, I was looking, because I was looking at some of the other content on Iran and stuff, and there was a Russia Today article, and they had said that Trump had suggested, quote, a friendly takeover of Cuba, and that he claimed that Washington is in high-level talks ongoing with the Cuban government for this so-called friendly takeover, which, as we know with Trump, everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie. So, I'm sure, whatever he says is a lie. So you can't really assess anything from that. We'll have to get the details. And of course, the very recent thing, we've seen this boat from Miami that had like 10, previous people that had left Cuba after the revolution, I think. And also I think there was a few that were known to the Cuban government as people that had tried to kind of foment regime change before. I believe they pulled there was a bunch of guns, thousands of rounds of ammunition, tactical vests and gear and stuff, radios, all this stuff. Like, the idea was to go to the island and kind of foment something, I guess. Do you have any thoughts on that piece? And then anything else as far as like why now why is this happening right at this moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, just as far as there's a lot there. As far as the boat that was
and then we'll get into Venezuela next.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. As far as the boat where the people were killed, yeah, I mean, it's really funny. I should say the event isn't funny. What I was going to say, the headline that I saw was funny in kind of a disgusting way. CNN, which is presented as this like kind of left-wing news network, which of course it's not, but ran the headline, such and such many dead in, boat attack by Cuban Coast Guard or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's, they were they were armed, and
Right. They weren't
again,
they weren't just out for a cruise or something like,
yeah, no, it
like when
wasn't. Yeah, and they were,
Trump talks about, January 6th, and they were out for, before they were going for a little tour of the Capitol, or they were out for a picnic or whatever, whatever kind of nonsense he says.
yeah,
They weren't
yeah.
out for a pleasure cruise around
No,
to check
no,
out
and
Cuba.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, the
Violence,
yeah,
ultra violence.
yeah, I mean, the not up for a picnic is a good way of saying it. Yeah, I mean, they certainly weren't there doing anything good, and I think we have to say that, like, yeah, the Cuban Coast Guard and the Cuban government has a right to defend itself, right?
Right, right.
Um,
And ultimately the people of Cuba. I mean, you see what's happening.
yeah,
We just saw a bunch of kids, and Trump says, "Oh, Iran is killing its people, so we have to defend them." And they do that by like blowing up 89 children at a girls' school or whatever. And it's like, I don't think that was defending them. So,
yeah,
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and that's really the thing that we talk about. Like, even, we'll get into Venezuela, it sounds like.
Do you
but
know how? This is just one other thing. Do you know if Mexico has been getting any humanitarian aid in? Like, I know they said they were going to, and Trump
It's a
like
good
basically said
question.
they should.
I know they said they were
They said
going
they were
to. I
going
don't
to.
know if any has actually arrived yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Honestly, like I said, there's been so much happening.
I was wondering
but
if that whole El Mencho thing or whatever, was just like Trump's dream thing, or like it was like his trade. Like they said, we're going to send humanitarian aid, and he said, well, you're going to be in big trouble unless you do this other thing I want, because he's always, the deal maker or whatever. Because I thought it was kind of
yeah,
weird that
any
happened at the
deals.
same
Well,
time, but. And it's
it's
also
really
weird
funny.
because Claudia Scheinbaum, I mean, she talks to him, and so all these people talk to him. So I wonder what behind the scene. I'd love to hear one of those phone calls recorded. I'd just be interested.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that Trump lies, and he certainly does. Um, but I will say he's also, honest maybe isn't the right word to use, but he's kind of bad at keeping secrets.
Oh yeah,
And he often telegraphs what he's going to do way before he does it.
right.
A great example is all this stuff with Greenland, where the world was watching, being like, "Oh my God, is the U.S. going to invade Greenland? What's going
Right.
on?" He basically started talking about that basically as soon as he was inaugurated in
Right.
2025. And even with the stuff in Venezuela, we had almost, not quite, but almost 6 months notice on that, right? And Trump was openly talking about it, all of this stuff. And so I think that, for Marxists, socialists, whatever you want to say, I think like we should be paying very close attention to the things that he says, not because he's going to tell us the truth per se, but because he often lets things slip. And the challenge often, at least for me, is sifting through and being like, okay, how much of this is just crap and posturing, and how much of this is him letting the world and his big business allies and everything know, like, hey, this is what's coming.
Right.
Something I've actually personally, especially as we're trying to get the international organizer off the ground, something I've been trying to spend a lot more time doing is actually digging into, the stuff that he's saying and doing much more, and saying like, okay, all this stuff that sounds totally crazy. Not just writing it off, but saying like, okay, we've got to dig into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, especially if you're going to try to, produce like a serious, left-wing publication, which we hope the organizer will be, it's, you have to, it's not enough to just, repeat, the various kind of homilies and stuff like that left-wing people are all familiar with. You have to know what the right wing is up to. You have to know what they're saying. You have to know what they're planning. And that's, part of the reason not to get sidetracked. But we have an article that we're planning on coming out with that digs into the last 10 years of anti-trans legislation across the U.S. And right-wing attacks. But not just the legislation itself, also like the talking points that the right wing has been using, trying to understand, how do we get to this point? right?
Mhm.
And so yeah, I don't want to deviate from the Latin America
No,
discussion.
but yeah, we should
Yeah,
we should definitely talk about that at some point too, and we'll share the article when that comes out.
yeah, totally. Thanks.
And yeah, this we're talking about some recent stuff. Of course, February 8th of this year, y'all had an article called Venezuela and Trump's naked imperialism. Obviously we know that Maduro, or many people that are paying attention know now that Maduro is in New York City, facing, I don't even know what charges, since they said it was about drugs, but then they said it wasn't about drugs, and I haven't dug into what the actual exact. I know they had some charges and they took a couple of them off, but they left a couple on. Anyway, looking at Venezuela specifically, not necessarily at Maduro and his charges, where are we? Where are the developments in Venezuela? Where are we at right now? Delcy Rodriguez is still theoretically, supposedly in charge, and
Yes. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, really, stepping back for a second and just assessing, the trend of, okay, we have, this coup in Venezuela. It's basically what it is,
Mhm.
And then also we have, the fact that Trump pushed hard and then backed off on Greenland, which was a huge embarrassment for him, by the way, because basically he was out there saying that the U.S. was going to invade Greenland and all of this stuff. It's worth saying the U.S. already, before all of that, it still does, but even before all of that, had completely unfettered and unlimited access to Greenland,
Right,
including for the U.S. military.
right,
So that whole episode where he basically got into a pushing and shoving match with another imperialist, NATO Western ally, was a huge embarrassment for him and for the entire U.S. government, and for U.S. imperialism. It did shake confidence of the U.S.'s partners and its kind of NATO alliance uh, um, block, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
Um, it did shake confidence, and that's a whole nother story. But yeah, so you have Venezuela and Greenland, and now Cuba. Um, Trump has said things like, threatening to, quote, hit land in Mexico, all of this
Right,
stuff. And which, again, ostensibly he says over drug cartels, right?
right.
But yeah, I mean, really, what is the
I was
reason?
actually, I was just watching it. I was just watching a good interview last night. Oh, and yesterday during the day too, from Red Nation, with the interview with the author of Drug Cartels Don't Exist. Just talking about how, for the most part, they're like, the way we think about them, at least, is like kind of a creation of the U.S. security industry.
Sure.
But anyway,
Yeah,
like,
I'm not familiar with that book.
they're
Yeah,
not like,
but
anyway. So yeah, keep going. But yeah, where are we at with Venezuela?
yeah, no, I was just going to say, basically, people might have heard Trump talking about something he's calling the Monroe Doctrine. It's a
Right,
reference to the Monroe Doctrine, U.S. President Monroe. Basically, the idea was that Latin America is the United States, quote unquote, backyard, and
mm-hmm.
that the idea with the Monroe Doctrine is that no one has the right to tell the United States what can or can't happen in its own backyard, and that U.S. imperialism has free reign. And so, this is an idea that Trump has revived and renamed, I guess.
Right.
But what is actually the reason for this, right? Because this is actually a huge departure from what we've, I mean, U.S. imperialism has always been warmongering and
Right.
doing all sorts of terrible stuff.
It's been
But
more covert previously, and now it's more.
yeah, absolutely. For the last several decades, there was this trend towards neoliberal globalization. Um, and what is the actual reason for all of a sudden all of this protectionism, right? These tariffs didn't come out of nowhere, right? There's been
Mhm.
a trend towards protectionism. There's been a trend towards, away from offshoring towards what's being called nearshoring and friendshoring for years now. And, China, which was for a long time, the biggest partner of, the United States. China made all these things and the US bought all these things, right? they have basically gone from being partners in carving up the world to becoming competitors now, which of course is the logic of capitalism. I mean, if you want to really get into it, that's what Lenin talked about in his pamphlet Imperialism. The idea that you're not going to have just peaceful capitalist expansion, because eventually these whether it's companies within a nation or imperial powers outside of a nation, they they go from being partners to becoming threats to each other. All of this stuff, and this is what's leading us on these cycles where we keep having these not just economic boom busts, but also these great power conflicts, right?
Mhm.
Which I think there's a real risk of today.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So basically,
Today more than ever before since I've been around.
yes, definitely, yeah. And so what you are ending up with is that uh, the U.S. And I should say U.S. imperialism
Mhm.
has basically been pushed out of to a large degree, not totally, but to a large degree, it's been pushed out of big sections of the neocolonial world, especially in Central and South America, and it's really failed in a big way in Africa as far as maintaining and expanding its kind of sphere of influence. And the thing that's pushed it out is China, especially with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is worth saying doesn't come no strings attached, right?
Mhm.
And there is a great deal of predatory lending. China is not a benevolent savior from the world. It's a capitalist imperialist power that exploits its own
Mhm.
workers. So it's actually a great book. I am not part of the organization that wrote it, but there's a great book by John Peter Roberts called China from Revolution or from Permanent China from Permanent Revolution to Counterrevolution. Really great book. Details basically over 100 years of Chinese history. Um, it talks about towards the end of the book, it talks about the actual concrete situation on the ground in China. It was written a few years ago, so it ends around 2013, 2014, something like that. But anyways, uh, basically, the Don Road Doctrine, the thing that it is all about, is saying, okay, the U.S. has lost, its ability to be the undisputed global hegemon, right?
Mhm.
And this is for a number of reasons. For one, um, it's because its own economy isn't doing well, and it's
Right.
also because the Chinese economy has grown so much. Although it's worth saying the Chinese economy is also in a pretty deep crisis right now. It's not exactly healthy. There's this housing bubble, all these other things that are going on, and so basically we're in a situation where these two kind of superpowers are stumbling and bumbling and seeing maybe which one can push each other over or can push the other over first, or which one falls down first. And the U.S. is trying to push China out of Latin America and out of what it sees as its own backyard, which is a big part of the reason it went after Venezuela. So Venezuela was one of the biggest trading partners in Latin America with China before the coup. Um, and this is something where it basically the numbers, especially on oil, are a little confusing because China bought a large percentage of Venezuela's oil that it produced, but it was actually a pretty small percentage of what China actually consumed, which is, of course, itself a small percentage of China's actual overall energy consumption, which mostly comes from other sources. But it was, in general, a very big trading partner. And it was also a historical boogeyman of U.S. imperialism. Just as a socialist, when I'm out on the street talking to people or in bars, hear people say, "Well, what about Venezuela?" Right?
Mhm.
Uh, and so this was, uh, yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it was kind of a legacy making, ego boosting victory for Trump, but it was about much more than that. It was
Mhm.
about pushing China out of Latin America. And especially now that now that that's been done, basically, China, of course, has not been pushed out of Latin America, but they have been pushed out of Venezuela. Now that that's been done, it provides a big opportunity to, from a regime change in Cuba, which is especially important to Trump for a lot of reasons. Not the least of which is that Trump's approval ratings are in the absolute toilet, and he's trying to shore up his ability to be seen as like a guy that can get things done. And I think that again, like it would be seen as a victory by a big section of his base, terrible as it is. But I think also it's about shoot. I mean, it's about also establishing the idea that socialism is dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
That worker states are not going to be permitted
Right.
anywhere in the world. As much that it is about that idea as much as it is about the idea that Chinese capitalism is not welcome in the Western Hemisphere, right? And but it's worth saying that this is a show of force by
Right.
Trump, all of this stuff, but it is not necessarily a show of strength
Right.
because the U.S. used to be able to establish its and maintain its global dominance, not just in one hemisphere. Used to be able to establish global dominance by using soft power, and now it has to flail about as it retreats to its own hemisphere. And on the one hand, it's a show of military strength and military superiority, which over
Right.
Venezuela, has a much smaller military than China, but a lot of the tech that failed in Venezuela was bought from China. So it's a show of superiority there, but it also is in some ways an admission of weakness, right? And that is part of the reason that it's being paired with all this bluster. It is the superpower that used to control the world proudly proclaiming that it has conquered the Western Hemisphere.
I was gonna say, just to fill in one little piece and one more connection with the Cuba too. I mean, most people, well, a lot of people, like I said, know that Maduro's in New York, that Maduro was taken from Venezuela, that the U.S. bombed Venezuela, and not everybody knows that 100 people were killed in that strike in Venezuela, including an 80-year-old lady who lived in an apartment like across the street from the palace or whatever. And also 32 Cuban security personnel. So, Cuba had, Cuba was right there, getting the brunt of that, from the start. It's definitely a change in how things go. And I agree with you that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's that the U.S. is in a strong position, but it definitely means that the U.S. is putting all of us in a very dangerous position, and that things are getting more dangerous. I really appreciate you speaking with me. Is there anything else that you want to share, about this or kind of the broader, context or other, writings or books or whatever that you want to share before you go?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the biggest thing right now is the International Organizer. You can find it on Substack. We're really trying to get it off the ground. It's very difficult. But I would say that I'm the main. I'm not the only person working on it right now, but I am. I would say the main person doing a big chunk of the writing. We have some other people that have articles they're working on, and I can kind of talk about what those are. But essentially, we're trying to fill in some of the gaps where important big world events and things like that are not being talked about, important things in U.S. politics, all of that kind of stuff. So, for example, we produced, the kind of first initial piece we produced was the one on Venezuela, and then we've had a couple on Cuba. We have one coming out that's kind of analyzing, the last 10 years of both the trans rights movement and the movement against trans rights and kind of where the left needs to go from here. And we also, it's an older article, but we reposted an article from 2 years ago. People might remember the name Next Benedict when when Nex, unfortunately, it was eventually ruled a suicide. But Nex was a trans high schooler that was the victim of a transphobic attack in the bathroom, and serious bullying, and sustained a head injury, and then unfortunately it seems like committed suicide by a drug overdose. And so some of us who are working on this had actually produced an article 2 years ago that was talking about that. So we reposted that as kind of a prelude to the trans rights article that we're coming out with. But we also have stuff in the works covering the wave nationally of student walkouts that has been happening, analyzing them, because there has been an absolute wave protesting Trump's racist, anti-immigrant attacks, and ICE and all of this stuff. And we also have an article that is in the works. This one is more of a longer term project, but actually analyzing some of the events in Europe, and especially France, with the growth of the far right, and specifically how it's kind of presenting itself as, the savior of women and girls and stuff like that, and kind of how both transphobia and Islamophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment and all of these things are being weaponized by the right wing. So this is the kind of stuff that we've been working on in the last 3 weeks. We've posted 4 or 5 articles. So there's a lot there, and we're trying to get it off the ground. It would be a huge help if people could subscribe. It's free. We're not taking any money right now. Stay up to date. But then I would say also, if you're listening to this and you're an activist and you want to consider working with us, we're open to working with people. We would have to talk about it and everything. But
Right.
if you want to help build the organizer, we appreciate the help, because we want this to be something that can be really solid and really good, as a source of news and analysis for big picture events. So I would say check it out and see what you think.
You mentioned gaps. Are there specific gaps or specific people with specific knowledge that you're looking for that you would like to find? Is that is that specific enough at this point, or is it not clear yet?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of things that both because the publication is very new, but also because I'm writing as fast as I can. But there's a limit. There's a limit.
I was gonna say you're getting out a lot of articles, so I was impressed.
Thank you.
I was impressed with that. I cannot get them out there. I get out 1 article a month, and that's enough.
Yeah,
I do my podcast every week, but it's still it's writing. Takes a lot of time.
I'm writing as fast as I can and doing what I can. Although it's worth saying, if you want to work with us, you don't have to produce 20 articles.
You have to write 3 articles the first day. As soon as you contact us, you better have 3 articles ready to go.
Chain you to a desk. No, it's not like that, but I would say that one of the things that I would say is a gap is we haven't currently written anything on ICE. Now, a big part of the reason for that is there's a lot being written, and a lot of it is very excellent by a lot of people on the left. And so we felt like, in this moment, it was something where, I've been sharing stuff and I've been following it very closely, but we felt that, basically, there wasn't something, particularly unique or important that we had to say about it that no one else was saying. And so that's not where we put the energy. But the fact of the matter is, and this is something we do talk about in the articles, is that there's a big question about where the immigrants' rights movement needs to go from here. And right now we do, as the anti-Trump movement, kind of have the initiative after Minneapolis. There's a huge opportunity to escalate. I know there's a lot of people talking about, the potential for general strikes, especially around May Day and stuff like that. I think that'd be great.
We had a workers' assembly here of 400 people some from unions, some not organized, that voted
Right.
to sign on to the call being put out, I think, by the Mayday Strong Coalition. Or at least that's one of them. There's probably more than
Yeah.
just one, but
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is really positive, I would have to, I shared it on Substack. If you want to follow me on Substack, my thing is you can, if you're watching, you can see I'm wearing a hat that says Troublemaker. My handle on Substack is Making Trouble, um, and and I do. But um, I shared an article by UAWD, which is Unite All Workers for Democracy. It is a opposition caucus, reform caucus, whatever you want to say, within the UAW, United Auto Workers, that was recently refounded, which is fantastic. And it basically details work that was done in the UAW. I don't remember the local and I don't remember the exact conditions, but it's basically paving the way for political strikes to be taken in opposition to Trump, which is huge. It's not saying it's going to happen. It's not saying it's a done deal, but it's laying the groundwork for strike votes to be taken, all of these things, which is worth saying. I think even if those votes were taken and they failed
right.
To pass, it would be a huge step forward to even take those votes and begin laying that groundwork. Because we can say general strike, general strike, general strike all we want, and the entire left has been for a long time, but it's not as simple as that, right?
Right.
So this is to say that there's a lot to be said about the labor movement right now, and there's a lot to be said about the anti-Trump movement, the immigrants' rights movement right now. Yeah, I definitely want us to produce more about that. And if there's people that feel like they have stuff to say, we can talk. Although, obviously I can't promise anything until I actually see it.
Right.
But yeah, so yeah, that's what I would say is that please do give us a follow and a subscribe. It helps. Read the articles, share them if you think they're good. If you think
Right.
they're crazy, you don't have to. But yeah.
I think I'll just say one more thing. I think January 23rd, in Minneapolis and surrounds. I mean, I think we definitely turned a corner on the whole idea of we just put out a thing and we say there's a general strike this day. I mean, I know, that's something we've been doing since at least since Occupy. It's been happening every I don't know what, twice a year or something, 3 times a year. I don't know, or more depending on how many random groups you can find. But there really is organizing going into this now. This is actually, and it actually has union members, a rank and file, and people doing things in the unions. So I think, I think, we need to be nuanced. It wasn't really a full general strike if you're going to use the definition, historically of a general strike, but it also wasn't those things where somebody just puts out a meme and nothing actually happens. There was significant organizing that went into it, and there was significant organizing by the unorganized that went into it. And so I think some people have overgone the other way and said it was meaningless and it was just the other ones. Not many people, but there has been a few. And we need to I think that the 23rd was a turning point. We're not quite there yet, but we're definitely laying the groundwork that we were laying before, but not really. I mean, we were laying before, but only in tiny little measures here and there, not for real. But it's really starting to build now.
It was an incredibly important step forward, and I think that from here, the question is how do we as the movement take the next step forward, right? Yeah, that's the $1 million question.
I think Minneapolis has put out a lot of ideas. We've done a lot of organizing. We had we did have one resolution at that workers assembly that didn't pass for a workers party. It was kind of divisive. It was kind of split down the middle because we have people that don't really believe in a workers party or really believe in the state at all within the coalition. But that's still something that's going to get debated, and I don't know what's going to happen. But I mean, I think there's people that are opposed to a workers party in that framing that aren't opposed to some kind of an institution that can do a number of similar things. So I think it's something that we have to debate. We've given a lot of ideas. I think Minneapolis is excited to look for ideas, thoughts, creativity from everywhere else. We're always open to seeing what everybody else is doing, and we're obviously keeping our eyes peeled for and especially on May 1st, I think there's going to be some interesting things. Some parts of the country in very specific areas are going to do some fun, like hopefully successful and good actions in their areas. And it's going to give some really good inspiration and hope for other people across the country, I think. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
pretty
If I can
excited.
just say quick, it's been speaking as a Milwaukee activist,
Yeah.
especially as someone who was very active during the Justice for George Floyd movement. It's been very inspiring to see Minneapolis stand up and fight back because, for a long time after, there was such an era of exhaustion that I always heard about from activists when I went there and stuff like that.
Right.
And so seeing Minneapolis stand up and crack ice across the jaw like this and give Trump a good shove. I mean, it is really, really inspiring and really, really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, we're inspired here too at ourselves or at our friends and comrades because it's like you do a lot of the work, but you never really know quite how everything's going to take off until you see it. So when it actually happens, you're like, okay, I'm proud of my friends, comrades, neighbors, and such here in Minneapolis. We've done a lot of good work, and yeah, we are kind of worn out, but we're still doing that. We're still doing the good work like everybody else, and we appreciate all the support. Thank you so much for your time, Sophie. I appreciate it. It's been a great
Thank you for
conversation.
having me.
And that was our special interview. Thanks for listening. Solidarity.
This has been a Socialist News and Views special interview.